My grandson barely touched his food that Saturday. I noticed it right away because Owen loves to eat. That kid can put away 2 helpings of my wife's pot roast and still ask what's for dessert. But that afternoon, he just sat there at my kitchen table, pushing a piece of cornbread around his plate like he was trying to solve some kind of puzzle with it. He was 7 years old, and something was wrong. I picked him up that morning from his mother's apartment over on the east side of Columbus. My son, Marcus, had asked me to take Owen for the weekend because he had to work a double shift at the distribution center. Overtime had been tight lately, and he couldn't afford to say no. Marcus and his ex-wife, Cassandra, had been divorced for almost 2 years at that point. The split had been ugly in the way that splits always are, when one person checks out long before they say the words out loud. She'd moved on fast, real fast, and somewhere in that moving on, something had shifted with Owen. "Buddy," I said, sitting down across from him, "you feeling okay?" He shrugged, didn't look up. "Your stomach hurt?" He shook his head, but it wasn't convincing. It was the kind of head shake a kid does when they don't want to say yes, but they also don't want to lie to you directly. I let it go for a few minutes. I got up and poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window looking out at the backyard. The leaves were just starting to change. It was mid-October, that crisp kind of Sunday that makes Ohio feel like a postcard. I watched a squirrel bury something under the oak tree and thought about whether I should push or wait. I waited. After a while, Owen got up from the table and came to stand beside me at the window. He didn't say anything. He just leaned against my arm the way he used to when he was smaller. That full-body lean that little kids do when they want contact but don't know how to ask for it. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "do I have to go back to Mom's tomorrow?" I set my coffee down. I turned so I could see his face. He was still looking out the window, jaw tight, the way his father's jaw gets tight when he's holding something in. "What do you mean, Bud?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't like how I feel when I'm there." "How do you feel?" "Tired," he said, "like really tired, all the time, even after I sleep." I crouched down to his level. My knees aren't what they used to be, but I wanted to be eye to eye with him. "Does your mom know you feel that way?" He did something I didn't expect. He looked at me very carefully, like he was deciding something. Then he said in a voice so small I almost didn't catch it, "Grandpa, can you look at what Mom puts in my milk at night?" The room went quiet. I mean, the whole world went quiet. "What do you mean?" I said. "What does she put in it?" "I don't know," he said. "It tastes different, like medicine kind of, and then I get really sleepy really fast and I can't remember going to bed." I stayed crouched there for a second. I kept my face as still as I could because I did not want him to see what was happening in my chest right then. I was 63 years old. I had worked 28 years at a logistics company, raised the son on my own after his mother passed, coached Little League for a decade. I thought I had seen enough of life that nothing could knock the air out of me anymore. I was wrong. "How long has she been giving you that milk?" I asked. He thought about it. "Since Danny moved in," he said. Danny. I didn't know much about Danny except that Cassandra had introduced him to Owen about 4 months earlier and that Marcus had mentioned once tightly that the guy was around a lot. "Okay," I said. I stood up slowly. I put my hand on Owen's shoulder. "Thank you for telling me, buddy. You did the right thing." He looked up at me. "Are you mad?" "Not at you," I said. "Not even a little bit." That night, after Owen fell asleep in the back bedroom, sober, just tired from a day of playing outside, I sat at my kitchen table and did not sleep. I am not a man who panics easily, but I also know the difference between a child who is describing symptoms, what Owen described, the altered taste, the rapid onset of sleep, waking up with no memory of going to bed. That was not a tired kid. That was something else entirely. In the morning, I called Marcus before Owen woke up. I told him everything, word for word, exactly how it came out of his son's mouth. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Dad," Marcus said finally, "are you sure he said that?" "I'm sure," I said. Another silence. "Then I'll be there in 40 minutes. Marcus arrived looking like he hadn't slept either, which he hadn't, because he'd been on shift. We talked in the kitchen while Owen watched cartoons in the living room, with the volume up. Marcus was trying to find reasons it wasn't what we thought. He said maybe Owen had misunderstood. Maybe it was just Benadryl. Some parents give their kids a little Benadryl for allergies without thinking about it. Maybe Cassandra had just been trying to help him sleep. I let him talk. I understood why he needed to say those things. Then I said, "Marcus, your son told me he can't remember going to bed." Marcus stopped talking. "We need to take him to the doctor," I said. "Not because I want to be right, because if there is any chance at all, that this is what it sounds like, we cannot wait." We took Owen to his pediatrician first thing Monday morning. Dr. Patricia Simmons has been Owen's doctor since he was born. She's a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who asks the right questions and doesn't talk down to parents. Marcus brought me along because he said he needed me there, and I wasn't about to argue. Dr. Simmons listened to what we told her. She asked Owen a few questions herself, gently, the way good pediatricians do, sort of working it in between, asking about school and his favorite games. Owen told her the same thing he'd told me, in his own words. She didn't react visibly. She just nodded and said she'd like to run some blood work. We waited in the exam room for what felt like an hour, but was probably 20 minutes. Owen fell asleep on the paper-covered table, which Dr. Simmons noted without commenting directly on. When she came back in, she closed the door. She pulled up a stool and sat down, which told me immediately that this was not going to be quick. She said the initial panel had come back with elevated levels of diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl, yes, but also in Zazquil, Unisum, and several other OTC sleep aids. The level in Owen's blood was not consistent with the therapeutic dose for a child, his size and age. It was consistent with repeated, regular dosing. She said in plain language that the concentration she was seeing was not from one exposure. She said she had an obligation to make a report to the county's Children's Services Division and that she was going to do that today. Marcus had his head down. His hands were clasped between his knees. He was very still. I asked Dr. Simmons what the effects of long-term diphenhydramine dosing were on a child Owen's age. She paused before answering. She said there were concerns about cognitive effects with prolonged use, attention, memory consolidation, learning. She said it was important that he not be exposed to any further dosing while the matter was investigated. She said she was sorry. She meant it. We drove home almost in silence. Owen slept in the back seat. At a red light, I looked at my son, and his face looked like something had been broken in it and rearranged. "She did this on purpose," he said. I didn't answer, because there was nothing to say to that. Children's Services assigned the caseworker named, and I will not forget this name, Ms. Beverly Crane. She was a compact woman, early 40s, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and who had the particular stillness of someone who has sat with a lot of terrible information over the years. She came to my house 2 days after Dr. Simmons made the report, because Owen was staying with me while the investigation began. Miss Crane spoke with Owen alone for about 30 minutes with a child interview specialist present. Then she spoke with me, then with Marcus by phone. She did not tell us everything she found out, but she told us enough. She said Owen had been consistent. She said there were other things she was looking into. She said Marcus needed to contact his family law attorney that day. Marcus had a lawyer. He'd kept one on retainer since the divorce because Cassandra had made the early stages of it difficult. His attorney, a man named Gerald Owens out of a small firm in Dublin, Ohio, was the kind of lawyer who doesn't make speeches. He just moves. Within 48 hours, he had filed an emergency motion for temporary sole custody, citing the active Child Protective Services investigation and the blood work results. Cassandra denied everything. She said Owen was prone to exaggeration. She said the diphenhydramine must have come from somewhere else, maybe our house, she suggested, which was so audacious it almost knocked me sideways. She said Marcus was trying to take her son away because he was jealous of her new relationship and that the whole thing was a coordinated attack by our family. Danny, her boyfriend, hired his own attorney. I want to pause here and tell you something about what it is like to watch your grandchild become the subject of a legal proceeding. It is not like anything else. You have no official standing. You are not the parent. You are not the attorney. You are not the caseworker. You sit in waiting rooms. You give statements when asked. You drive to and from the school and the doctor's office and the courthouse, and you take care of the child in front of you. And at night, when the house is quiet, you sit with your feelings and you do not let the child see them. Owen started having nightmares, not every night, but often enough. He would come padding into my room at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I would hear him in the doorway, quiet, waiting. I would say, "Come on, bud," and he would climb up into the bed and fall back asleep fast, like he just needed to know someone was there. I lay awake after, watching the ceiling. The custody hearing was 6 weeks after the initial report. Gerald Owens had by then compiled the blood work, Dr. Simmons' testimony, the CPS report, Owen's school records showing a pattern of falling asleep in class over the previous few months. And this was the piece that changed everything. Text messages between Cassandra and Danny. I don't know how those texts came to light. Gerald said something about discovery, and something about Cassandra's phone records being subpoenaed. What those texts showed, apparently, was that Cassandra had complained to Danny more than once about Owen ruining their evenings together, and that there were references to giving Owen something to help him sleep through their time alone. Danny had responded in at least one message with a specific product recommendation. The judge at the emergency hearing was a woman in her 60s named Judge Fiona Merritt. I sat in the 3rd row of the gallery and watched her read the compiled evidence with an expression that did not change, but whose stillness carried its own weight. She asked Cassandra's attorney 3 questions. She got 3 answers that did not satisfy her. She granted temporary sole custody to Marcus effective immediately, with Cassandra's visitation suspended pending a full evidentiary hearing. When the gavel came down, Marcus turned around from the plaintiff's table and looked at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Cassandra was charged 6 weeks later. The county prosecutor, I think she had been waiting for the full CPS report to be finalized, charged her with child endangering under Ohio Revised Code, Section 291922, which is a felony when the victim is under 13 and the conduct creates a substantial risk of physical harm. She was also charged with domestic violence, a separate count related to the ongoing nature of the dosing. What happened after that was the part that still sits uneasily with me. She took a plea deal. Her attorney negotiated it down. She pled guilty to a lesser charge, misdemeanor child endangering, and received 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory parenting classes, a fine, and a requirement to have no unsupervised contact with Owen, no jail time. I want to be honest with you about how I felt when Marcus told me that. I was at my kitchen table. He called me from outside the courthouse. He told me the deal, and then he was quiet, waiting for me to say something. I said, "Is that the best they could do?" He said, "Gerald says it's within the normal range for a first offense with no documented physical injury." I didn't say anything to that. I have a lot of respect for the law. I spent a career in logistics. I believe in systems. I believe things work better with rules. But there is a particular kind of grief that comes with watching a system apply its normal range to your 7-year-old grandson, who is still having nightmares and still occasionally asks at bedtime if his milk is safe. That grief doesn't really go anywhere. You just carry it. Danny left Cassandra within a month of the plea deal. I don't know if he was trying to put distance between himself and the situation legally, or if it was something else. His name came up once more in a follow-up interview that the prosecutor's office conducted, but I was never told what came of it. I choose not to spend too much time wondering. The full custody arrangement became permanent at the 6-month review. Marcus got sole legal and physical custody. Cassandra was granted limited, supervised visitation. 2 hours, twice a month, at a family resource center with a monitor present. Owen knows the visits are optional. He has exercised that option. He has chosen on his own at 7 and then at 8 years old not to go. I do not tell him what to feel about that. I just tell him I will be wherever he needs me to be. Here is what I want to tell you about Owen now. He is doing better. Not perfectly. Kids who have been through something like this don't just snap back like a rubber band. His second-grade teacher told Marcus at the fall conference that Owen was catching up in reading comprehension, which told us without telling us what she'd noticed the year before. He's in a Thursday evening program through the Columbus Rec Center, a robotics club for kids his age. He comes home from it talking a mile a minute about gear ratios and circuit boards, and I sit at the kitchen table and I listen to every single word. He asked me last spring if he could get a dog. Marcus said he'd think about it. I told Marcus to stop thinking so hard. They got a beagle mix 3 months ago. Owen named him Captain. Captain sleeps at the foot of Owen's bed every night, and Owen has not come into my room once since they brought that dog home. I think about that Saturday afternoon often. Owen standing beside me at the window, that small voice, that enormous question. I think about how close it came to me brushing it off. He was tired. Kids get tired. I could have given him a second piece of cornbread and turned on the football game and told myself everything was fine. But something made me wait. Something made me crouch down and look him in the eye. And something made that little boy decide that his grandfather was a person who would believe him. I don't take that lightly, not even a little bit. If you have a child in your life, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, a kid next door, and that child says something that doesn't sit right with you, even in passing, even quietly, I am asking you to listen. Really listen. Put down whatever you're doing and get to their level and let them know you heard them. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect our kids are the ones they need protecting from. And sometimes all it takes is one person who believes them. I still think about that squirrel burying something under the oak tree while Owen stood beside me at the window. That's what I was looking at when he said it. Such a small, ordinary moment. And inside it, something that would crack our family open and rearrange everything. I've turned it over a lot since then. The question of why it happened. Not in a bitter way. More like the way you turn a stone over just to see what's underneath. What I keep coming back to is this. The choices Cassandra made didn't happen in a vacuum. Every decision has a weight to it, and that weight goes somewhere. She chose convenience over her own son's safety, night after night, and eventually that weight landed exactly where it was always going to land. In a courtroom, in a custody agreement, in a child who now chooses twice a month not to see her. Actions don't disappear. They accumulate, and they come back around one way or another in the shape of consequences. What saved Owen wasn't luck. It was a 7-year-old boy who somehow held on to enough trust to whisper the truth to someone he believed would listen. That took something real. Kids who have been let down learn not to speak up. Owen spoke up anyway. I don't know where that kind of courage comes from in a child that age, but I know I will not take it for granted for the rest of my life. And Marcus, I watched my son do something hard over those months. He wanted to find another explanation. Every father does, when the alternative is accepting that the person he once chose to build a family with has done something unforgivable. But he didn't let that desire for a different story override what he knew was true. He made the call to the doctor. He sat in that courtroom. He did not look away. That is the harder thing, to see clearly when seeing clearly costs you something. And he did it. I think about the people who don't act. The grandparent who notices something off but figures it's not their place. The parent who suspects but doesn't want the conflict. The neighbor who sees something and tells themselves it's probably nothing. I understand that instinct. I've had it myself. But Owen's story is a case study in what happens when someone decides to trust what they're seeing and do something about it anyway. The blood work confirmed it. The texts confirmed it. But none of that would have mattered if I had handed that kid another piece of cornbread and changed the subject. There's a version of that Saturday where I do exactly that. I think about that version more than I probably should. What I want to leave with you is simple. It doesn't require a degree or a title or a perfect family. It just requires paying attention, real attention, not the half-listening kind, and then having the spine to act on what you learn. Owen needed someone with enough moral clarity to recognize that a child's whispered question mattered more than keeping the peace. He needed someone with enough sense to take that question to a professional instead of trying to handle it alone. And he needed someone stubborn enough to keep showing up through 6 weeks of legal proceedings and nightmares and courtroom waiting rooms until it was finished. He had that person. Every child deserves one.